Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Monday, June 9th, 2014, start of a brand new week of utter insanity, chaos, and dictatorship. And we have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Sam is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. A couple of program notes. On tomorrow's show, we're going to have Dr. Peter Glidden. He is part of the group that produces a line of products called Longevity. They're one of our new advertisers at whatreallyhappened.com. They very generously sent over some of their products for Claire and I to try out, and I am noticing a difference already. So we're going to be talking about necessary elements in diet that are depleted and replacement of that on the 13th. Friday the 13th, for all you Trishka-decaphobics out there, Gilbert Levin will be joining us to talk about latest news and obfuscations coming from NASA regarding the planet Mars. Obviously, the big news today is getting bandied all over the place. There has been yet another tragic mass shooting, this one in Las Vegas, where apparently a man and a woman reportedly just executed two police officers sitting at this pizza buffet. Screamed, "It's the start of the revolution, it's the start of the revolution," ran into a Walmart, supposedly shot somebody else, and then they were found dead of gunshot wounds, presumed joint mutual suicide. And frankly, these things are getting a little bit obvious. How convenient that the shooter is always dead so we can't find out what was really going on here. And the gun grabbers are out there saying, see, how many more innocent Americans must we kill? I mean, how many more innocent Americans have to die before you will give us your guns? The media is already out there trying to link these two people in Las Vegas to the activists at the Bundy Ranch. They're being characterized as white supremacists. I mean, they're just no foundation for any of that, but they're out there to demonize them and say, see, we've got to take the guns away to save the world from whatever. And it's there. I'm smelling panic. I'm smelling panic because it does look like all the Federal Reserve's instantly created money is not going to be able to hold together the illusion of solvency much longer. And the government is very much afraid of the fact that we, the American people, because of the Second Amendment, have weapons able to resist government tyranny, which is the reason the Second Amendment is there. To remind the government that they really ought to be polite and respectful of the general population. Now, I want to go back to the situation with Bergdahl because it is turning into a farce. And now, apparently, John Kerry is out there hinting that the United States government is going to send drones to kill these 5 released Taliban. That's how they're going to fix the problem. And this Bergdahl scandal has become a litany of one failed decision after another. First, there was this desperate plan to offset the effects of the VA scandal by bringing home an American hero. Only that didn't work out because the hero turned out to be a deserter and a defector. And this put the focus on these 5 Taliban officials who were released, which, although they may have been among the 1/3 of Guantanamo detainees who've been cleared for release by the military tribunal. The media has been promoting them as really bad guys. Look at all these bad guys. Obama let these bad guys go. So now the response by the White House appears to be they're going to sort of renege on that whole release deal. Now that they've set them free, they're going to send in the drones to kill these 5 guys and, of course, 100 innocent bystanders. And the White House apparently seems to think this will make the scandal go away. No, it won't. It absolutely will not. And sitting out here in the real world, I'm looking at the White House, and it seems like they're thinking maybe next week is as far ahead as they can think. And seizing the headlines, seizing the media focus, changing the dialogue. And it's really not working because it's just scattered all over the place. And the idea that they're going to fix this scandal by going in with drone strikes to kill these 5 guys who were released, and they think that's going to sort of equal it all out. No, it isn't. because you know they're not going to get just these 5 guys. We're not even going to know if they get these 5 guys. They may just pick 5 targets at random and say, we got them, problem over. And we know that these drone strikes are killing innocent civilian non-combatants all around the intended target. Huge problem. All righty. Now then, Rand Paul, apparently he's been reading the internet because he went public today with this joke that was actually floating around the internet last week about getting back that Marine held in Mexico for gun-running charges, and maybe we ought to trade 5 senior Democrats to get that Marine back. And that, of course, would be Barack Obama, Harry Reid, Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, and Waxman, and a whole bunch of these other people here, which actually sounds okay until you realize that Mexico might view that as really kind of a horrible insult or an injustice. All righty, let's see. We've got a caller on the line, Jerry in Chicago. Aloha, Jerry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Thank you very much for taking my call. I heard you plug Youngevity as a sponsor to What Really Happened, and I got to tell you, I've been on using their products now for 3.5 years, lost 41 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I drink filtered and distilled water with it. And I try to drink at least 2 quarts of it every day, but I mix it up in a gallon to my taste liking, not the way the directions say, because you end up flushing a lot of it down the toilet, let's say.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. Well, listen, Jerry, I'm going to let you go because we got a lot of news to cover, but obviously I'm hoping that you will tune in tomorrow when Dr. Glidden is our guest here, because what he's saying really makes a lot of sense, but I don't want to go into it today. So we're going to let you go, and moving on back to the international news here. El-Sisi is now inaugurated as Egypt's new president, despite obvious signs of vote fraud and a very low turnout by the general population. And, of course, Israel is saying, oh, yes, congratulations, and the U.S. is saying congratulations. Basically what it is the enforced return of a Mubarak-style government on the Egyptian people. They had a revolution, kicked Mubarak out, put Morsi in. Morsi wouldn't do as he was told by Israel and the United States, so they've kicked him out and put El-Sisi in. And pretty much everybody understands that's exactly what happened. Now, this issue of vote fraud is itself becoming a joke, because we're seeing over in Syria, where Assad has just won this amazing landslide victory, and people were lining up for blocks to vote him back into power. And that's been, it's a farce, it's illegitimate. They voted for him because they're afraid of him, and they're trying to undermine that. Meanwhile, of course, over in the Ukraine, where those transparent ballot boxes were photographed with stacks of neatly folded ballots in the bottom of them, which can't happen when you're just dropping in one at a time through the slot. And that was declared legitimate and an expression of democracy. Well, the money junkies have apparently decided that the way they're going to counter the recent European Union Parliament elections is to declare, that was all massive vote fraud. The people of Europe, they love the European Union. They love the European Central Bank. Somebody was rigging the election, and we can just go ahead and safely ignore the will of the people there. Now, when I put this article up over the weekend, I was going to link it to that HBO documentary, Hacking Democracy, which I hope you've all had a chance to see, because when I went over to the YouTube page for the documentary Hacking Democracy, I got a message saying this video cannot be shown in your country. So here we have a documentary by HBO about massive election fraud in the United States of America, and YouTube is saying if you live in the United States of America, you're not allowed to see it. It doesn't really work, because if you just go to a search engine, you will find that same documentary all over the place. It's over at Hulu. It's over at Vimeo. So this idea of trying not to let Americans see the fact that their elections are crooked as dog's hind leg really didn't work. Our elections are so crooked they have to screw those ballots into the ballot boxes. All right, we're going to take a break for some commercials. When we come back, we've got another caller waiting on the line, and we will continue therewith. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones here. Keith in Montana. Aloha, Keith. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, young man. I hope you and the wife are doing fine.
We're doing as well as can be expected.
Well, you can't beat that. We're just waiting for our warm weather to finally warm up. Our ground normally stay warm enough to keep our seeds going for the garden. Anyway, I want to talk to you about that bird bill thing. I really don't care about this thing here, but I noticed that, what's his name? can't think of his name. Anyway, Wes Tarpley. He was referring to exactly how they're trying to play this Bergdahl thing against Obama. It sounds more like, and it does, like they're trying to push Obama into either making a move on Syria or Iran, and they're using this. You know how it was with Clinton, and like the scandal in the latter part of the second term, and like that, to force these guys out of office. And it just seems like it's more politicking for the neocons to get their wars going.
Well, I did notice over the weekend on the media shows the inevitable neocon talking heads were out there screaming about how weak Obama is and how lacking in resolve, and the usual rhetoric that we hear when they're trying to goad the president into an invasion of Syria. The problem with that, of course, is that Syria has retaken most of the ground held by the hired mercenaries. All the lies about sarin gas and chlorine gas are now exposed to the world completely as lies. Assad won re-election with a huge turnout of people who wanted to vote for him, and now he's offering a general amnesty all across Syria. If you put your gun down and offend no more, you can go home, and nothing will happen to you. And so right now, the United States does not actually have any kind of a justification that anybody's going to buy for why the U.S. has to just invade Syria. They may just go on and do it anyway, but they certainly can't claim the moral high ground here. They're just going to have to say, you're right. The only reason we want to go into Syria is we want their oil and their money, and if you're a loyal American, you'll just follow along right behind us.
Yeah. Have you noticed that this government no longer represents we the people?
Well, I've noticed that going back about 20 years, you know.
Love you, Mike. Okay.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. Yes, it's a government of the money junkies, by the money junkies, and for the money junkies. All righty. Getting on over to Ukraine, Kiev troops are still shelling Slavyansk despite all of Poroshenko's rhetoric at the G7 calling for peace and nonviolence there. They're still out there uncorking on the civilians of eastern Ukraine with heavy military weapons. This is a violation of international law when you go out and use tanks and artillery against civilians. Apparently, at least one child has been killed during all this shelling here. On the other side, the apparently at the town of Severny, the Ukrainian border guards abandoned their post at the Russian border, and now the border between Ukraine and Russia is wide open, which there's this huge flood of ethnic Russians who are leaving eastern Ukraine and seeking refuge in Russia, and Russia's welcoming them in and trying to take care of them here. And it shows the foolhardiness of this military campaign to recapture eastern Ukraine, because that was where all the factories were and the agriculture and all the workers that generated the revenue from which Kiev was hoping to repay all these loans they've had to get from the IMF. And by the time this war is over, that part of eastern Ukraine, it's going to be a dead zone. It won't be productive. It won't be manufacturing. It won't be growing produce. So even if they walk into the desolation, plant a flag, and say, we've won, they've already lost in the economic sense. All the workers are going to go into Russia, and they're going to stay there. And I'm sure Poroshenko will be screaming, give us back Crimea, give us back our slaves, and it's not going to happen. Meanwhile, over in Donetsk, apparently their freedom fighters managed to grab a large body of military forces and discovered they're not Ukrainian. They're working for Kiev, but they are Polish and Czech mercenaries. Kiev can't get their own Ukrainian people to go over to the east and kill more Ukrainians. So they're bringing in all these mercenaries. And, of course, this is driving Kiev even further into debt, which Kiev presumes the Ukrainian people will just be too happy to spend their lives paying it all off. But they're down to using mercenaries. This is like when King George III was trying to stop the revolution in the United States of America, and he brought in the German Hessians. Exactly the same thing going on. Now, article over at Strat Risks, Ukraine, Arab Spring, Cold War II, and price wars hardly disguised. And they're basically commenting on the fact that as we head into big mistake number 3, the war-making powers have lost the advantage of being able to disguise the true motive from the general population. And what we're seeing in Ukraine is basically sphere of influence between Europe and Russia. And more importantly, this is a war being fought between ExxonMobil and Gazprom. And the people on the ground, well, that's just the cost of doing business. But that's what this is all about. Control of the oil for economic reasons. And it's already had a backflash. It was just announced that Russia has completed signing agreements with all of its customers that it will no longer accept U.S. dollars as payment for Russian oil and gas. They're going to continue accepting the euro, but only for a short, finite period of time. And after that point, anybody wanting to buy Russia's oil and gas must pay for it with the ruble. So that is a major, major blow against the dollar. Now, I understand at the end of World War II, when payments between countries were still handled mostly by physically carting around paper notes or bullion, where having one go-to currency could make a little bit of sense. But here in the 21st century, where money is moved around the globe instantaneously, electronically, there is actually no need for a single global banking and reserve currency. The only reason to have one is for the owner of that currency to reap a profit from their mafia-like piece of the action, charging interest on all of it as it whips around the globe. And the rest of the world is realizing there's no reason to go through the dollar to do trade with this other country over here. There's no reason to go through the euro. It's an old, obsolete concept from the last century, and it really isn't germane to the present realities any longer. All righty, apparently up in Iraq, and I'll bet you thought that war was over too, more than 100 people have been killed in a single day of violence on Saturday. Mostly around Ramadi, where militants took students hostage. 60 dead in Baghdad, apparently another 59 in the country's north. They're not even able to hold on to Iraq. They're bogged down in Afghanistan. This whole war to force the world back to Bretton Woods and the petrodollar, they're already losing it. And unfortunately, this government can never admit error or failure or mistake and change course. So they're going to keep on pushing this until the final defeat and destruction of the United States of America. And that is very sad and very tragic. Apparently, 10 NATO countries are now starting war games in Latvia. And apparently they've got 4,700 troops, 800 military vehicles. The troops have come in from the United States, Canada, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Norway, and Great Britain. And along with the B-52s that were sent over last week, apparently 2 B-2 Spirit bombers have been flown to the U.S. European Command Area of Operations. So they're standing in the stealth bombers now. Those are expensive aircraft. They don't normally use them for training. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I know we got a caller waiting on the line. Before we get to him, though, I'm looking at the news feed here, and boy, they are just using a skip loader to dump the USDA choice bovine excrement all over this Las Vegas shooting. Now they're reporting that the shooters draped the Gadsden flag. Don't tread on me, over the bodies of the 2 dead police officers. They're known white supremacists. They were linking them with the Bundy Ranch, and they believe conspiracy theories. Next, they'll be out there saying they don't believe human-caused global warming, and they tear the tags off their couch cushions. And they're trying to maximize the propaganda value of this incident. And the more they do that, the more obvious it becomes. That's what they're doing. Remember, the latest version of the NDAA authorizes the U.S. government to use propaganda against you, the American citizens. All right, we're going to go to the phones here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. I read about that report where they draped the flag, and then the police came out and said that wasn't true. Yeah, they can. Nobody reads the newspaper anymore. I don't know why they keep printing it.
No, well, apparently what I want to know is who started that story. If it actually wasn't true, who decided we're going to try and link the Gadsden flag with this killing?
You know what I noticed? There's just a lot of shootings going. This is unbelievable. I'm like looking. I'm like, they're in overdrive right now.
They are. We talked about that on Friday. We've had all these shootings, all of which appear to be very suspicious, like the one in Santa Barbara, and now we've got this one. And it looks to me like the gun grabbers are just going to go on killing innocent Americans until they convince the rest of the nation to surrender their firearms.
One thing I noticed is, boy, all these people have enough balls to shoot themselves in the head.
Yes, how very convenient.
Hey, about the 5, remember I called in last week, I said the Congress and the Senate, they'll just throw anybody under the bus. Now they're throwing the Taliban under the bus. How many times is people going to believe these people? They're throwing everybody under the bus. When things don't go their way, they throw you under the bus. And they threw the CIA under the bus at Benghazi. They throw everybody under the bus, to either cover up something or other than that. It's like ridiculous. How people...
Well, they're in survival mode. They're in survival mode, and they're not thinking long-term. They're not thinking about any kind of a cohesive narrative to the propaganda. It's just saying whatever's going to get on the news today and get them through another couple of days, and it's just completely disjointed. But there is another aspect of this we need to be taking a look at. And I talked about this possibility last autumn, and that is that once we were more than halfway through Obama's term in office, they might actually go ahead and impeach him because he certainly has committed enough impeachable offenses. And what that would do is that would put Joe Biden in the Oval Office. And that means Joe Biden would go into 2016 already being the president. And that is going to be very, very difficult for Hillary Clinton to overcome during the Democratic primaries. So I think all of these Democrats who are lining up to protect President Obama right now really don't care about Obama. They're trying to protect Hillary because they're risking their own reelection by continuing to stand with the president who's just gone completely off the constitutional reservation. And I think Hillary's out there. And by the way, I saw her in the news today. Looks like she's had another facelift. So she's getting all gussied up for 2016.
They all had facelifts.
And I think what's going on is they're basically going to try and keep Obama in the White House so that Hillary and Joe Biden go into the Democratic primary more or less as equals. Because if Biden takes over the Oval Office, and I'm not all that happy about that idea either, but Hillary's not going to be able to overcome the fact that he's already a sitting president. And if he goes into the Oval Office in the second half of Obama's term, then he becomes eligible to run for 2 additional terms on his own. And I think Hillary's looking at that and just absolutely does not want it to happen.
I just wanted to mention something real quick with the economy.
Yeah.
With all these deals Russia and China is doing, it's slow, but it's called death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Yeah, it is. And the more the U.S. and these private central bankers push on Russia and China, the closer we come to a point where Russia and China can bring the whole system down. They could win World War III without actually firing a shot, just like
Crimea.
Just by taking the foundations out from under the dollar. The dollar doesn't have a foundation. You can't bring dollars back to the United States and get much of anything for them. In fact, Canada's military just said, we don't want to have the F-35. It's too dangerous for our pilots to fly. We have no manufacturing. Nobody wants any more GM cars anymore. Nobody wants our agricultural exports because of GMO. The only thing holding up the U.S. dollar's international demand is its linkage to other people's natural resources and the threat of U.S. military force if you dare disobey.
You know what stinks for all these countries buying the F-35? They had to pre-order it.
Yeah. Oh, man. Talk about a pig in a poke on that one.
The time the thing comes out, we'll be all using magnetic drives.
They tried to put a magnetic drive on the catapults of the new aircraft carrier, the Gerald Ford, and they can't get those to work either.
Yeah, the F-35 is a disaster.
It is. It's boondoggle all in capital letters, and it basically illustrates for everybody that this military-industrial complex, it's all about money, and they don't care if they send our kids into combat with weapons that don't really work all that well as long as they cost a lot of money.
Yep.
All right, Dustin, we're going to let you go and grab a quick phone call from Fred in Iowa. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. I want to be one of those patriotic American Christians I'm pretty old, and I want to talk my grandsons and my grandnephews to go over there and join the military and kill all them men and women that want to hurt our government or join the police force and kill those pesky little children and old men and women that are terrorists. You know, I want to be patriotic American. Thank you, my friend. I'm through.
All right. Well, thank you very much for a most entertaining phone call. We're going to let you go. All righty. Now, some very alarming developments. Of course, we all know the United States has this enormous arsenal of nuclear weapons. But it turns out, and this is a story that came out of Aleppo News, the Obama administration has been increasing funding for the development of bioweapons. In fact, according to the National Institutes of Health, there's been what they called a catastrophic reordering of emphasizing bioweapons research over non-bioweapons research. In other words, the National Institutes of Health is spending more of its time developing biological weapons than dealing with diseases and illnesses and the rest of it. And this is very scary. First of all, there are treaties in place against biological weapons. And my concern is, when we look at how badly they messed up the F-35, the idea that the U.S. is pushing to develop new biological weapons is terrifying. One mistake could mean the end of human life on Earth, because we know how recklessly they handle the development, even of drugs that are supposed to help you. And we're going to have more about that later in the show. Little piece of historical information. Since the end of World War II, there have been 248 armed conflicts, of which the United States started 201. That's 81% of all armed conflicts since World War II were started by the United States, killing 30 million human beings. The United States has war murdered more than Hitler's Nazis did. Now, yesterday was the anniversary of Israel's attack on the USS Liberty, and there were a lot of people out there commemorating it, remembering what was going on, trying to basically get the media to pay attention. And for those of you who are not familiar with the story, on June 8, 1967, there was a U.S. Navy intelligence ship, the USS Liberty, and it was sailing off the coast near Egypt and Israel, and it was attacked by Israel. They tried to sink it. They attacked it with unmarked aircraft, and then when it didn't sink, they had to follow up with some of their little tiny shore patrol boats, which were marked with Israeli logos. 34 Americans were killed in that attack, and Israel tried to claim that it was Egypt attacking the USS Liberty. And there was a nuclear-armed airstrike on the way to Cairo when the crew of the Liberty finally got an improvised antenna up to replace the one the Israelis shot away and got a message out saying, "This is Israel attacking us." And there's been a cover-up about it ever since. The official story, it was dark, it was cloudy, it was foggy, we couldn't see what we're shooting at. Well, if you can't see what you're shooting at, don't pull the trigger. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. So we're talking about the USS Liberty. Now, Israel has a long history of what are called false flag attacks. The bombing of the King David Hotel was carried out by Israelis dressed as Arabs. In the 1950s, there was the Lavon affair, where Israeli agents were bombing British and American assets inside Egypt and planting evidence to frame the Egyptians. And they got caught doing that one. It was a huge scandal. USS Liberty was exactly the same. They were trying to sink the ship and tell the United States Egypt had done it to trick the United States into war against Egypt on Israel's side. Same thing with USS Cole, same thing with 9/11. Israel lives by the dirty trick. Now, when the Liberty got out the message that they were under attack by Israel, the airstrike against Cairo was aborted. But the White House literally ordered U.S. ships in the area not to go to Liberty's aid. In fact, there was a air support launched from a carrier, and under orders from Lyndon Johnson, they were told to come back to the carrier. And Lyndon Johnson supposedly said, I would rather see that ship at the bottom of the ocean than embarrass our allies. And for all of Israel's might, they were not able to sink the Liberty. It limped back to port. The captain was given the Congressional Medal of Honor in a secret ceremony, the only time in the entire history of the Congressional Medal of Honor that the medal was conferred in secret, inside a Navy yard. No public, no press allowed whatsoever. The crew were threatened with court-martial and prison if they ever dared tell the story of how Israel was deliberately trying to sink their ship. And the commanding officer that was in charge of this cover-up was Admiral McCain, John McCain's father. They've been buddy-buddy and doing Israel's work for generations. It's a multi-generational thing. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. Mo in Florida. Aloha, Mo. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hello, Mike.
Yes, you're on the air.
Oh, Mike, love you. Absolutely love your show. Love Claire. Been listening to you for about 6 months, and you're one of the few people that tells it like it is. And I'm not a hater. I love the Catholic people. I love the Israeli people, but I hate their governments, and I hate the structure, the phoniness. You tell it like it is, bro. I love you, man. You're the best.
Thank you.
But I have a question for you, and I did know about the USS Liberty. First, two questions. Number one, how come nobody's made a movie about it? And you would probably be best answer to that than probably anybody else. And the other question that I just really, ever since I started listening to your show, was how come they didn't plant some plutonium or something in the desert with Saddam Hussein? It would have been very easy to do. They must have really thought that he had them, or they could have easily planted some false evidence. And those are the two questions. I'd love to hear your answer.
Okay, well, first of all, in terms of a movie, in order to get, and by the way, I was approached by a group that wanted to produce a movie about the USS Liberty incident. They wanted me to head their visual effects for them. Unfortunately, in order to get financing for a movie, you have to basically go to those entities in Hollywood who will fund movies, and they will not fund a movie unless you can convince them that you will have a distribution deal. And those companies that do film distribution generally don't go along with any movies that challenge the status quo. And so the project kind of died on the vine. Now, with regard to planting something on Saddam Hussein, my understanding is that, yes, indeed, they were taking a clandestine nuclear weapon into Iraq right after the invasion started in order to discover it, and it got hit in a friendly fire strike, hideously contaminating the Baghdad airport. And at that point, they said, we can't do this one again. And that's my understanding about that. Or they may have simply believed that they still lived in a world where as long as they kept telling the American people Saddam has nuclear weapons, we would all believe it. And obviously, we don't. We know the government lies all the time about pretty much everything. And they've been doing it all along. Now, getting back to the USS... do you have one more thing?
No. I just, you're the best, man. I listen to you every day.
All right, well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Now, Ray McGovern, who's a former CIA agent, and he's now independent, is writing a lot of books. I had a chance to meet and chat with him on the 10th anniversary of 9/11. And he came out with an article about leaving the USS Liberty crew behind, basically saying that those crewmen on the USS Liberty who survived Israel's attack were maltreated by the Navy afterwards, treated with suspicion, constant monitoring, surveillance. And these guys didn't do anything wrong. They committed no crime other than to be in possession of information that proved the official story that Israel simply mistook the USS Liberty for an Egyptian horse carrier was an absolute lie. For one thing, the Egyptian horse carrier in question had been decommissioned, wasn't in service. Second, horse carriers don't have gigantic antenna arrays, including steerable dish antennas on top of them. And some of the pilots who took part in that raid have gone public saying, yeah, we knew it was the Liberty. We told our command it's an American ship, and we were told to attack anyway. Now, the Liberty survivors have come on out there and pointing to the debacle in Benghazi as proof that the government covers things up, are saying, yeah, we need to get this story out in the open. Well, the story's out in the open. I'm not a big supporter of calls for a new government investigation into a scandal because the government, it's just another chance for the government to polish the lies at taxpayer expense. We know what happened. We have enough information to conclude for ourselves what happened, and I don't need the government to tell me I'm right. I do not cede to the government the authority to tell me whether I'm wrong or right in my conclusions. I know what makes sense. I know where the facts and logic lead. Speaking of cover-ups, remember we reported a little while ago, at the same time there were allegations that Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 was shot down in yet another stupid mistake by U.S. naval forces. There was a report from an oil rig worker who had gone public saying that he saw the plane fall out of the sky on fire pretty much where the transponder signal was lost. And apparently he was fired from his job after reporting the incident. Boy, does that sound familiar. A lot of us have been through that right now. Alrighty, getting on over to the economy. Interesting article over at the International Man. It's titled, I Owe My Soul, and it's a reference to the country western classic 16 Tons. And but it really goes into this whole issue about these private central banks and this idea behind the negative interest rates. And what they're saying basically is zero interest rates didn't revive the economy, so let's go to negative interest rates, and that can only help things. And this is another example of the extreme lengths all of these financial people are going to make it look like they're trying to solve the economic problems, but without looking at the real cause of it all, which is that when you have a privately owned central bank issuing all of the public currency as a loan and interest, the debt builds up faster than the available money supply. There isn't enough money in existence to pay off all that debt. And that growing debt is used by the bankers to control governments, to control nations, and to control the people, and ultimately to send them off to world wars. Before the creation of the Federal Reserve, there was no such thing as a world war. We're into number 3 right now. Now, another article, this came out of Prison Planet, secret European cash limits in place. And what this article is saying is cash limits, capital controls are already in place in Europe. And they're now starting to go public with them. And back when the European Central Bank announced that negative interest rate, I predicted there'd have to be some kind of capital controls to prevent people from emptying their accounts. And here it is. Meanwhile, Chase Bank is now looking at charging you an extra fee for handling cash. They want you off the cash. They want you on the little plastic cards because they get a piece of the action of that. And if you're not going to play the game their way, if you insist on using cash, they're going to charge you an extra special cash handling fee. Their greed knoweth no bounds. All righty, we're coming up on the top of the hour, and there's the music, and we've got a caller waiting on the line, but I'm afraid you're going to have to wait until our top of the hour segment. So we're going to take a break here, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show today, and we're going to go to the phones. Jason in Austin. Aloha, Jason. Welcome to the show. Thank you for waiting. What's on your mind today?
How you doing? Thank you. Well, I'm a taxi driver. Reading this article about the Virginia being stopped.
Okay, your phone connection is breaking up a little bit. Can you try and talk a little closer to the phone?
Okay, do you hear me now?
Yeah, much better. Thank you.
Okay. I'm a taxi driver in Austin, Texas,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm reading the article about the Virginia orders a Lyft to stop. And I'm kind of wondering where you're coming from on this. I mean, are you against the city telling them to stop?
Yeah, I very much am. And apparently they're running a sting operation now where they're having undercover people go out and get on this social network and say, I need a ride down to the shopping center. And when somebody shows up to give them a ride, they're arresting them or ticketing them or something like that. And it's basically...
I apologize. I cut you off there.
Okay. And I understand this is all coming from the taxi cab companies who don't want us to give ourselves and our friends and neighbors ride, but have to go to them. And I understand how tough it is being a taxi cab driver. My issue here is this attitude of a government that doesn't want us taking care of ourselves, but is enforcing us to be dependent on whether it's Monsanto for food, the taxi cab companies to get around, and the big utilities for our power. They absolutely are trying to create a state of dependence where we can't do anything in our life without somebody making a profit off of it.
Let me just add one thing, if you don't mind.
Sure.
As a driver, when you drive for, at least in Austin, I don't know about Virginia, but in Austin, you're independent as a driver. And when you make profits as a cab driver, you keep them. It's it's the independence that we like. When the other Uber and all the other competing cab, similar cab situations, they don't pay the same insurance to the city the way the cab companies do, and they're not insured in the same way that we are. As a driver, I prefer to be independent rather than getting paid through those companies. I totally agree with you when it comes to the city and what you don't like about the city and them. I don't like the whole idea of the city telling anyone what they should and shouldn't do for work. But there is an issue when it comes to the individual cities and insurance versus the cab driver's independence.
Well, I understand what you're coming from, but I'm remembering back to the last time there was this supposed oil shortage in the Middle East, and everybody was encouraged to carpool. We had the diamond lanes in California, and now all of a sudden, because it's harming the taxi cab corporations, the state of Virginia is saying, no more carpooling, no more using the internet to find rides to get where you go. You will, by golly, go to our good friends over there at the taxi corporations, and you will give them money, and they will give us a piece of the action. And that is the part that I find absolutely aberrant.
I completely agree with you. But driving for those other companies, we as drivers lose our independence. So me as a driver, I'm kind of happy that the city is backing the taxi corporations who have been paying insurance to the city. And, for example, when the sting operations happen here in Texas, they'll impound the driver's car, and the driver may not even understand what's happening. And Uber may or may not compensate them for the loss of that vehicle.
Okay, well, we're wandering off the topic here, and I understand what you're saying, and I understand that, the taxi cab companies and independent drivers, like everybody else in this economy, they're having a hard time getting by. But what we need to get away from is this idea that the government is going to solve the economic problems by forcing us to go out and spend more money when we just don't have it. And it's a failed concept, it's a failed policy, and it's just accelerating the rush toward collapse here. So, Jason, we're going to let you go here, and I want to get back onto the main economic news. Story over at deviantinvestor.com. Houston, we have a problem, or market extremes are back, and they're commenting on the extreme volatility that we're seeing in our manipulated stock markets, and saying that this is really good for the 1% with their high-speed computer trading systems because they can ride the trends up and down. But it's disastrous for the lower 90% of the population who ultimately pay for all this gamesmanship and don't have the advantage of these systems. And again, we were talking last week, there are a lot of parallels between the behavior of the stock and bond markets and treasuries today versus what they were in the months leading up to the crash of 1929. Now, there's another article. This came over at ETF Daily News, Public Exposed to the Gold Conspiracy in Ways Never Before Seen. And the whole point of this article is that insiders and people who've been studying this for a lot of years have known all along that gold and silver and various other commodities are manipulated to the benefit of the money junkies. But now the general public is catching on. And obviously a big part of that was the gold conspiracy episode of History Channel's America's Book of Secrets. And people are just all of a sudden saying, all of these people in the financial industry, all of them, are there to get rich, and they're willing to lie, cheat, steal, and do anything they can, especially in the face of a federal government that has set as policy that no top financial CEOs or bankers will ever be arrested or prosecuted for fraud. And that has gotten us to the situation today where the entire system is being held up and made to look solvent and functioning entirely through fraud. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, Gazprom has now completed signing agreements with all of its current contract customers that the U.S. dollar will not be accepted as payment for Russia's oil and gas. They will continue to accept the euro for a finite amount of time to ease the transition, but after that, you will have to have rubles to buy Russia's oil and gas. Article over at Russia Today. Russian companies de-dollarize and switch to the yuan and other Asian currencies. And that's a good reason for you, the American people, to start dumping the dollar and conducting your commerce with something else. Remember, on the front part of that piece of paper and ink, it says this note is legal tender for all debts public and private. It doesn't say it's the only tender for all debts public and private. You can carry out commerce with anything that you and the person you're trading with agrees to use as an intermediary. Whether it's Ron Paul dollars or beans or the yuan or the euro or whatever. There is no law that says you must use that U.S. dollar. And the rest of the world is getting out of the dollar. The writing is on the wall. And especially with Chase Bank now saying they're going to charge you a cash processing fee. And all these private central bankers saying, we have to have negative interest rates. We have to just be able to help ourselves to your savings accounts because we're bankers and we must be propped up no matter how much suffering it causes for you, the serfs, because that's what you're here for, is to prop up the rich people. All righty, we're going to grab a quick phone call. George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, how you doing, Mike? Hearing about those two cops dead in Vegas, that smells of high heaven because they're trying to blame it on patriots, anybody on the other side, saying it's and I only find out that these two people that killed the cops were thrown off the Bundy Ranch.
Well, we know we know the story about the Gadsden flag didn't happen. So we're already got to confirm that this thing is being propagandized and spun to serve the government's agenda, whether it's repeal of the Second Amendment or demonizing anybody who believes in conspiracy theories. But to me, it reeks of another false flag setup with a conveniently dead perpetrator, so we can't actually find out what's going on. Okay?
It just sounds like they're getting desperate.
Yeah, I smell panic in the air. I really do. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And apparently there's another breaking story of an armed man roaming a neighborhood in Los Angeles and leading police on a chase. Yeah, they're going to go on putting on these staged incidents until everybody says, oh, please, take our guns away from us, make us safe. And you won't be. It's another hoax. And by the way, apparently Raw Story is now laying the blame for the Las Vegas murder of those two police officers on Alex Jones and Fox News. Because they're promoting these conspiracy theories that cause people to doubt the government. No, it's the actions of the government that cause us to doubt the government. We should never trust somebody who's a proven liar, which is what we have here in the case here. All righty, another article on the Economy Investment Watch blog, another nail in the U.S. dollar's coffin. China's renminbi is starting to displace the U.S. dollar as a trading currency in Asia and Europe, and now inside the U.S. Remember, we were talking about that last week, where American importers are now buying their Chinese imports using the renminbi. So it's starting to unravel rapidly. Rapidly. All righty, over at the IMF, Christine Lagarde has finally kind of admitted something we already knew. They made some bad predictions, and it didn't work out the way we thought it was going to. Well, there's a very good reason for that, because all of these people involved in this global private central banking scam want to look like they're working to make the economy better for you and me. And they'll come up with all kinds of harebrained ideas so they don't have to talk about that critical flaw at the center of private central banking, that by design it creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt. It's a pyramid scheme. It only lasts as long as they can find, an ever larger population of new borrowers to allow the creation of new money, part of which pays the interest on the old money. But all pyramids eventually collapse when they saturate the available population, which is where we are. And they're trying to find some way that they can get us to borrow more or get the government to borrow more, because without that, it is going to start coming apart. And nobody wants to talk about this reality of private central banking. So they're going to blame this or blame that, or, this was unexpected, or it was the hard, cold winter hammered the U.S. economy, just before they go back to how human-caused global warming requires a carbon tax. Over in Great Britain, food bank demand grew by 54% in 2013. And we're seeing the same thing here locally in Hawaii with the food programs that Claire and I are part of. The need is growing. The median age of people needing to take advantage of these programs is dropping. It's not just old retirees and people. It's young people now, families with kids, people who went to college, got hideously into student loan debt, can't find a job that makes the college degree worthwhile. Another big stink coming in over from Great Britain. Apparently, owners of large properties have started installing what are called anti-homeless spikes. Anywhere there's a little alcove where a homeless person might curl up and get out of the weather and sleep, they're putting these little spikes in the ground so they can't get comfortable. And it betrays a certain callous attitude by the rich toward the poor. And all those homeless people have to do is find some big, thick pieces of styrofoam packing material in the trash bin, put them on the spikes, then they can lie down. That's what's going to happen. Now, we were talking about over in Virginia, where the state government is now saying that ride sharing through social media is a bad thing because it's depriving those taxicab corporations of revenue. Well, apparently Florida is going the same way, and cops in Miami are running a sting operation to catch Lyft drivers. They'll post on the Lyft network, I'm at the shopping mall, I need to get to here, and somebody comes by and gives them a ride, and they get ticketed. It's enforced dependency on corporations. And enforced dependency of any kind is a tool of enslavement. That's why we call July 4th, which we're coming up on here in a little less than a month. That's why we call it Independence Day. Not Freedom Day, not We Kick the British Butt Day. Independence Day. The day when we were no longer forced to be dependent on the Bank of England for our currency, no longer forced to be dependent on the British East India Company for tea and various other goods, no longer forced to be dependent on the knitting mills of Manchester and Leeds for our clothing. We got to go out and find the best deal that worked for we, the American people. That's what independence means. And they hate independence. They want you dependent because dependence means control. That's why they're still advertising for people to sign up for food stamps. Yes, it's terrible, but sign up for food stamps, because once you are dependent on that government to eat, you will not stand up and say, I think the government's doing a bad job. Now, over in Arizona, Governor Jan Brewer is very upset over the revelation that the federal government has been taking illegal immigrants that are piling up over in Texas and busing them over to Arizona and just dropping them on the ground. Now, my question would be, well, why not drive those buses south instead of west and take those immigrants, back to the border where they came from? But instead, remember, this is a government that can never admit that any of their policies are failed. So they're taking this huge homeless population and they're moving them over to Arizona and just dumping them there. And apparently the federal government has told the governor's office in Arizona the practice is going to continue. And apparently they dumped 1,000 illegal immigrant children, unaccompanied, no parents, no adult supervision, just dumped them into Arizona. Now, part of the scandal, of course, is that some of the Border Patrol agents and other whistleblowers were taking pictures of all these unaccompanied children who were dumped in Arizona, posted them on the Internet, and immediately the Border Patrol leapt into action and threatened any of their agents posting pictures of these dumped illegal children on the net will be fired. That's their idea on how to fix the problem. Just going to fire them. Audit of the Veterans Affairs is finding that some 70% of Veterans Affairs hospitals have a secret waiting list that is hidden from the official electronic waiting list. The total estimated veterans who are still waiting for their first visit to a VA hospital is 57,000. Now then, apparently the Veterans Affairs Department has been accused of retaliating against whistleblowers. The U.S. Office of Special Counsel announced that it's received complaints from 37 VA workers claiming their superiors punished them for speaking out about the problems at the agency. They're trying to create a climate of fear inside the VA, inside the entire government. If you're a whistleblower, we'll treat you the way they treated Damiens after he tried to kill the King of France. Ugly stuff. Meanwhile, over in Tennessee, a sheriff called Homeland Security on a journalist who was requesting public records regarding the treatment of prisoners at a local jail. You know, I'm a reporter. I want to find out what's going on here. Oh, Department of Homeland Security, go and talk to this person. It's really descending into utter chaos. By the way, speaking of the Department of Homeland Security, apparently they have branded "This Can't Be Happening" a threat to the nation because of the revelation and documentation that these fusion centers, which were supposed to be all about fighting terrorism, were actually being used to monitor and orchestrate the attacks on the Occupy movement in cities all across the United States of America. And the Department of Homeland Security doesn't like the American people knowing what the fusion centers have been really up to. So all of a sudden, this can't be happening. They're on the special high-interest targets list. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Fox News is having absolute orgasms over the fact that there's a man with an assault rifle running through a neighborhood in Los Angeles down by Colfax and Magnolia, and they're showing all the tweets from all the people who've seen him. He's got an assault rifle. The police helicopters are overhead. They can't find him. Assault weapons are bad. Now, remember, the statistics are assault weapons don't get used to commit crimes. Small, hide-in-the-pocket guns are what people go into convenience stores and hold them up with. This guy's out there trying to get attention. Look at me, I have an assault rifle. And they're making a big deal about it. And, of course, I don't think they understand. What they're telling everybody is all the police, the 8 helicopters, everything, they can't find the guy. But ordinary, law-abiding American citizens are watching this guy run right by them, and if only one of them had a firearm, as guaranteed to them under the Second Amendment, they could have stopped the guy. They're trying to spin this as a case to ban assault weapons. They're actually making the case that an armed population wouldn't be dealing with this problem. But this is another one of these false flags. They're going to surround the guy. He's going to wind up, oh, he shot himself in the head, so we will never know what was going on. And it does seem like the gun grabbers have just decided they're just going to go on staging these hoax mass shootings, and it doesn't matter how many innocent people are going to get killed because they serve a higher purpose of disarming the American people. Harumph, 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 harumph. Now then, interesting article out of opednews.com. And it asks a question that was asked by Edward Snowden. What comes after it's okay to kill Americans and jail them indefinitely without counsel? Because that's the position the White House has been taking. That they can go out and kill Americans. They won't release the memo by which they claim there's a constitutional authority for this, which tells us there isn't. They've gone off the constitutional reservation. And the government of the United States of America is legitimate only when it complies with the restrictions in the Constitution. That's the original contract with America. So they're out there drone striking Americans and staging all these hoaxes. And remember, the current NDAA says the U.S. government is now allowed to use propaganda against you. Mass shootings in Las Vegas, a gunman with an assault rifle in Los Angeles, shooting in Santa Barbara. It's all propaganda. They are lying to you to get your consent to things you otherwise would not consent to. And it's a valid question. When the government presumes the right to kill you without trial, or to throw you in prison forever without trial, what comes after that? And it just underscores the fact our constitutional freedoms and rights are being ignored by this government. in their desire to maintain power, control, positions of wealth and authority. Story coming out of Blacklisted News. Apparently, the evidence is indicating some of the higher-ups behind the IRS scandal, where they were targeting conservatives and dissidents, and apparently the paper trail now leads to Chuck Schumer. And basically, apparently Schumer decided that the Citizens United ruling was a good thing for liberals and Democrats, but gave too much power to conservatives. And so he apparently encouraged the Internal Revenue Service to go after conservatives and dissidents in order to offset the advantage for them from Citizens United. And apparently there's been a formal complaint filed with the Senate Select Committee on Ethics, which means absolutely nothing will be done about it. But this IRS scandal did not originate in Cincinnati with a rogue IRS official. This goes all the way up to the highest levels of the United States government itself. Another article, speaking of this 8 helicopters and everything else that's going on, the article over in newsforge.com talking about how war gear is now flowing to civilian police departments. They're getting body armor, fully automatic weapons, heavy weapons, armored vehicles, drones. Apparently over in Indiana, their sheriff just justified the purchase of a 55,000-pound mine-resistant ambush-protected military vehicle by saying the United States of America has become a war zone. And he's actually right. But who is it who's turning it into a war zone? It's not we the people. It's the police departments. It's the federal government that are turning this country into an ongoing permanent war zone. They are preparing to declare war against the American people and the 50 states. They almost want some kind of an uprising that they can use to justify all of this. Which is why I continue to urge calm. Because the one thing this government and this money system cannot defeat is 300 million Americans standing up to the rest of the world and saying this government's illegitimate, it's unconstitutional, we're not going to do what they say anymore, we don't agree with what they're saying, and we will not be the wallets of last resort for Wall Street's crimes and corruptions. And that's going to bring down the whole financial system and the federal government with it. Then we'll take all these weapons that they've been buying for the police force and for their government agencies and resell them on the surplus market with a big sign overhead, never fired, only dropped once. Now, apparently, Senators Dianne Feinstein and Barbara Boxer are out there exploiting the Isla Vista shooting, and they're pushing a new bill called the Pause for Safety Act, which will allow the government to confiscate guns from anybody based on somebody around them feeling uncomfortable about the fact that they have guns. The gun grabbers are going to witch hunt tactics. Oh, I'm very nervous about this person having guns. Has he done anything wrong with the guns? No. Does he have a criminal history? No. Is he mentally unstable? No. He's a really nice guy, but I don't like the fact that he's got guns. All right, we'll take the guns away so that you will feel safe. They are panicking. You can just feel it coming out of Washington, D.C. and Wall Street. They're absolutely panicking. They're trying to slam the door on the cage shut before more Americans wake up and realize what's going on. Over in Great Britain, more fallout from the revelation that some of Britain's top telecom companies were working hand in glove with British intelligence to maintain surveillance on law-abiding British subjects. And apparently Vodafone was one of the worst offenders. And they're basically saying, yeah, if you're using Vodafone products, just assume the government's listening in. The government says they have a right to do that. A lot of people are getting very nervous about all of this spying. Now, there's a very interesting article over at RINF.com. And the headline is, How Safe Is Your Money? U.S. Treasury says it limits spy access to bank books. Well, the only reason I think they're going to come out with that statement is they are concerned that Americans are, in fact, starting to empty their savings accounts and keep the money at home, some of it in physical silver and gold, in advance of Cyprus-style haircuts or negative interest rates. And the fact that the government is spying on all your financial transactions is probably not helping the situation. So they're going to back up and say, oh, no, we're not really looking at you. Say, you can leave your money in the bank. We're not spying on you. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you. There is no truth in the government. Everything they say is crafted to get you to do something they want you to do. Leave your money in the stock market. Leave your money in the savings account. Be dependent on our favored cronies and so forth and so on. Now, last week we were talking about this emerging scandal involving the Catholic Church and these unmarried mothers and how they were used for slave labor by these nuns. There's a movie out on the subject called Philomena. It stars Judi Dench. It's an amazing movie. Make a point of trying to catch that one. And this whole incident was sparked by the collapse of a concrete cover over an unmarked grave at one of the location of one of these facilities, which revealed a septic tank and almost 800 bodies of small children whose deaths apparently had not been recorded. And it turns out the situation is getting worse. First of all, that grave of almost 800 children now represents something like the 34th, 35th of these mass graves that have been uncovered at these Catholic facilities, most of them in Canada at the residential schools. Then we found out last week that these kids were literally being sold by the nuns to pharmaceutical companies for illegal human testing of potentially dangerous vaccines. And now we're finding out apparently the government of Ireland was getting a little piece of that action as well, which is why they looked the other way. When we come back from this commercial break, I have some comments about all of this. I guess the good news is all the pedophiles in the Catholic Church are saying, whoa, the focus is off of us. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. We're going to go right back to the phones. John in Barbados. John, aloha. Thank you very much for waiting. What's on your mind today?
Hello, Michael. Yeah, coming back to this nonsense with the Catholic Church, I've been reading studies that have been done recently, and since the turn of the last century, it appears that there are about 380,000 people missing in Ireland alone. Now, I mean, from my perspective, this religious nonsense has to stop. This promotion of this myth. We've got to prescribe the Catholic Church. Henry VIII.
Well, it's not just the Catholics. I'm sorry, it's not just the Catholics. The reality is, good people are going to do good things, bad people are going to do bad things, and both will use religion as their excuse.
Well, unfortunately, Michael, the majority of this nonsense is going on with the Catholicism, and I think that's got to stop. I mean, children are damaged all over the world. I mean, it is completely obvious that the American military target women and children as their main enemy. They have done since the turn of the 18th century, with the Indian Wars and what have you.
Yes.
Why would you target with your modern weapons, these laser-guided weapons? Why would you target children's orphanages and schools and hospitals and universities in Libya?
Well, Kiev is doing exactly the same thing in eastern Ukraine right now. They've hit a couple of hospitals and schools.
Exactly. So this nonsense just has to stop.
I would absolutely agree. I mean, looking at all of this destruction on children, I get physically ill. This story about coming when I saw the movie Philomena and it looked like it was just this one institution, that was bad. And now to find out it was systemic. And over the weekend we ran this story where there are now over 30 of these mass graves of children associated with Catholic institutions, most of them in Canada, connected to those residence schools. And it is, I question the holiness of an institution that would treat innocent, unoffending children this way, because regardless of what you think their mothers may have done, being a sin, you don't punish and stigmatize the children for that. And yet that apparently was the attitude. Oh, this child is the product of sex out of wedlock, therefore they're inferior human beings and not deserving of our love and concern and consideration. I find that absolutely appalling.
Well, Mike, there's a gentleman, a sergeant, who was in the British military. He's now in a mental institution for questioning what happened to the 15 children that were adopted from one of these schools by Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip in 1967, none of which have been heard of since. None.
Well, I know, and
what happened to those children?
This goes back to that situation that was detailed in the movie Philomena. The records were destroyed, so nobody could know where they went or who, what happened to them. And basically, it was supposed to be for the privacy and protection of the children and the parents, but it was actually to cover up the fact that these kids were simply being sold to wealthy people who wanted to adopt. And it was just another money-making opportunity, as was the slave labor. These mothers were made to work incredibly long hours at these commercial laundries, taking in laundry from the community for which the church got paid to deal with the laundry, and these women were made to work. And it's appalling, the degree of enslavement that we're seeing here, masquerading as the divine moral authority of the world. And I agree, it has to stop.
What I see about this particular incident in 1967 and the royal family in Britain is that it's been on in the media for several years now, but none of these children who are now adults have come forward. They know, the people involved must know they were Native American children, the Indians.
Well, I've got a comment here in the chat room here that apparently this scandal with the maltreatment of unmarried mothers and their children is now touching the Anglican and Episcopal churches, and similar stories with the Methodists. In fact, I was having this discussion with my wife the other day where she said, well, that's the Catholics, but, the Methodists don't do that sort of thing. Well, remember the massacre of Sand Creek, where the U.S. troops rode in and just, carved up all these women, children, and old men and decorated themselves with body parts? The commander of that unit was a Methodist minister. And I think we get into a situation where people can convince themselves it's okay to do anything at all as long as they've convinced themselves it's the will of the imaginary playmate up in the sky. And it is a huge, shocking scandal. I see it as far worse than the ongoing pedophilia and the cover-up, and now it looks like there's been a cover-up here as well. And, boy, I don't envy Pope Francis one bit. He's got his work cut out for him. John, we're going to let you go. I want to get one. Bye-bye. We want to let one more call before the commercial break. Ron in Texas. Aloha, Ron. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Ron, are you there? Okay, I guess we lost Ron. And getting on back to the economic news, as you're probably already aware, there's this big stink about General Motors, a.k.a. Government Motors, after all the taxpayer bailouts that were used to keep them afloat and putting out products that apparently are not very good. And apparently General Motors' own internal investigation into this ignition switch problem has led to the firing of 15 employees. And basically GM is saying, yeah, there was a consistent pattern of incompetence throughout the development of this product. Well, that's a failure of management. I'm sure the people who got fired were all low-level people. But your job as a manager is to watch these people and make sure they're doing the job they ought to be doing. And the specific nature of the failure in this ignition switch, that the little detente that was supposed to hold the key in various positions was simply too short. That's a design problem, and it should have been caught long before it ever went to manufacture. We know that GM was aware there was a problem, didn't want to spend the money to fix it. 13 dead, possibly more than that. They're still trying to dig that one out. Now, this raises an interesting question. We have now had the Supreme Court declare corporations are people in the Citizens United decision. They're protected by the First Amendment. Well, if corporations are people, it's time to charge General Motors with murder and sentence General Motors to death. okay? Because we're looking at involuntary manslaughter. At the very least, General Motors ought to be suspended for 20 years, the effect of a jail sentence. So if corporations want to be people, it's time for them to start accepting the responsibilities that go with being people. And that means when you commit a crime that kills people, you have to be punished for it. Not fine, not wrist slap. I'm talking about the corporation itself. Either blocked from business for however long the equivalent jail sentence would be, or sentenced to death, which means you decorporatize it. You carve it up and sell the assets here. All righty. Speaking of carving up, over this last weekend, along with the anniversary of D-Day, which everybody was making a big deal about, was also the anniversary of the assassination of Robert Kennedy, which didn't really get a whole heck of a lot of mention anywhere on the corporate media. But as it turns out, story over in Blacklisted News, apparently information has surfaced that President Lyndon Johnson blocked an Air Force plane that was going to bring the top brain surgeon in the country from Boston to L.A. to try and treat Robert Kennedy. And Johnson canceled that Air Force flight. All right, so we're going to take a break here, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. I'm already getting emails asking me what kind of an uninterruptible power supply I had, and it is an APC XS 1500. I've only had it for 2 years, and today when the power went off, it failed to keep my computer running. We have another unit in my wife's office. That one, for some reason, did work, and her computer stayed up. But I'm going to be on my way down to the Office Depot to buy a new unit after the show today. We're going to go to the phones. Ron in Texas is back. Ron, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello. How are you doing today?
Well, I've had better days.
Yes, sir. I got a question for you. I've been hearing a lot about this. I've done a lot of research, but I cannot find out what the impact it looks like it's going to impact us on. That H.R. Bill 2874 that passed 2 years ago that goes into effect July 1st, what do you think will happen when it goes into effect? Will it be a slow impact, or will it all of a sudden that day just hit hard?
That's kind of hard to guess, because I know the government is desperate to start grabbing resources and assets. On the other hand, they have to understand if they do anything too abrupt or draconian, it's going to call attention to itself and could possibly trigger the American people getting very upset. Now, if I recall correctly, this is the bill regarding the 401ks, where they're wanting people to liquidate them and buy special government treasury bonds. And, of course, it's complete and utter nonsense. The treasury bonds, the reality is they're worthless. There's a treasury bond bubble. They have printed more treasury bonds than can ever be redeemed, no matter how many Americans, give everything they've got to the government. The money to redeem those bonds is not there. The tax revenues are not there. And I have to wonder at the thinking where they're overselling the treasury bonds at the same time they're driving wages and salaries down, which means they're cutting their own throats with regard to the tax revenues.
Well, they hid this bill in kind of like a work bill. They had it hid back in the back of it. It was a work, something to do with the work, and then it's coming in and helping people in the communities.
Well, again, I know that I think it's July 1st is the deadline, or the starting point where it's going to start the conversion. But if they just notify everybody with a 401k at the same time, they're going to have a lot of angry people in this country.
Yeah. Can they go in and still take your, I heard it even affects your IRAs too. They can come in and take. At
this point, the government. At this point, if your money is in some kind of a bank account or anywhere connected on the computer network, the government has already decided in the event of a national emergency, they can grab everything. They've even passed a law saying they can go into your safety deposit box and confiscate anything that's being held there to save the banks and save the economy, which it won't do. It'll only prolong delay the inevitable outcome. But yeah, the last official act of any government is to loot the nation, and that's where we are right now.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, sir.
All right, you got it. All righty, now then, article over at LouRockwell.com going into depth about how and why the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change demonized carbon dioxide with what is now obviously known to be fraudulent manufactured information. And basically the idea is the New World Order and the global government wants the more developed nations to slow down so the undeveloped nations can catch up. And the way that you slow that down is you either cut off the fuel supply or you curtail the exhausts. And they knew cutting off the fuel supplies were going to anger the population. So they said, oh, the exhausts are bad. You must voluntarily reduce your CO2 emissions, forgetting that most carbon dioxide comes from the ocean, volcanoes, things like that. The human contribution is very, very tiny indeed. But that's one of the reasons carbon dioxide was demonized, to link to human activity, to say you must slow down your activity for the global good, meaning less for you and more for the money junkies here. And by the way, it did snow over this last weekend in New Mexico. So then, anyway, over in North Carolina, we mentioned this before, but apparently it's moving forward rapidly. State senators in North Carolina are introducing a bill that will restrict information about the chemicals used for fracking. Now, the available information so far is these are highly toxic concoctions. There is reason to suspect that many businesses with toxic waste disposal problems are going to the fracking companies and saying, we will give you X number of dollars if you will take this toxic waste product we can't get rid of anywhere else and pump it down into the ground, and the fracking companies are doing it. And now people are beginning to be very concerned about this toxic waste products winding up in their water supply. And so apparently North Carolina's solution is to now say that the fracking companies can keep what they're pumping into the ground completely secret. And anybody who releases that information can be prosecuted. Talk about total fascist dictatorship in operation. Another story coming out of Russia today, apparently there is a growing problem with methane and other toxic chemicals in the tap water in Texas linked to fracking. Now, if you've seen the documentaries on that, there are many places in this country right now where if you turn on your tap and you hold a lighter to the water coming out, it will burst into flame from all the methane bubbles in there. Another story over at 21st Century Wire. You remember a while back they had this 4-mile-long mudslide in Colorado. Well, apparently that may not be what happened, because apparently the witnesses on the scene are saying there's no actual mud. It's something happened to burst the ground and slide it down the mountain. And that location where that happened is the only fracking location in the area. And coincidentally, they have this huge ground displacement. Now, methane eruptions are a absolute scientific fact. They've had methane eruptions on the ocean floor that will swallow oil platforms. Methane eruptions on the floor of the Caribbean are thought to explain many of the strange effects attributed to the Bermuda Triangle. And methane eruptions can happen on the surface as well. This appears to have been one of them that was triggered by the fracking operation. Another article over at CBC. Antidepressant drugs may not be the best treatment. Gee, you think? And I shouldn't be sarcastic. I'm absolutely delighted. The corporate media is finally taking a look at this. And this article is talking about all these medications, Zoloft, Prozac, and Paxil, which we know are linked to episodes of extreme violence. The theory of operation of these SSRIs, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, is serotonin is what makes you feel happy. And if you have a serotonin deficiency, you feel depressed. And so these medications block the reabsorption of serotonin in your brain so that you will have more of it and you'll be a happy little mushroom. But apparently new research is showing that these SSRIs, in addition to blocking the reuptake of serotonin, are inhibiting the brain's ability to make more of it. In fact, on that chemical basis alone, these medications are causing more depression than they cure, which is what we're seeing in all of these stories over at ssristories.com. But we live in an age where corporations are allowed to sell us anything that they want to, as long as it's making huge amounts of money. Government gets a piece of the action, and when the damage and harm comes out, well, you know, we'll pay off a few settlements, and that will be that. And it's just a cost of doing business. And they absolutely do not see the lives that they ruin, the harm that they cause. Because, hey, if this product is making these people sick, it's another opportunity for profit. We'll sell them a pill to make things a little bit better. All right, we're coming up on a commercial break. I know we've got a caller on the line. We're going to have to keep you through the commercial break, and more about science and health and medicine when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones real quick. Jeff in Colorado. Aloha, Jeff. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I was just going to say, you was talking about that landslide up there around Colburn. There is massive amounts of oil drilling and fracking going on up in that neighborhood.
Yes.
But there's also, that's a natural occurrence. I've seen massive landslides. I've seen landslides that make that one look teeny.
Mm-hmm.
That it's just from the snow melting and running into the ground, and at a certain point, there's a certain point of lubrication that's reached in the soils, and gravity takes over, and down it goes.
Yeah, but with the fracking operations, they're pumping lubrication down into the soil and the rock, and the reason it's legitimate to ask if there's a link here is because all across the United States of America, in areas where fracking is taking place and there is no prior history of seismic activity, they're now starting to get these clusters of very small earthquakes, including the one that damaged the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. So we don't know what caused it, but it's legitimate to ask, is this fracking causing this damage? All the more so because you've got the toxic chemical problem getting into the water supply, the methane getting in there, and now on top of it all, they're admitting that they're not going to get the oil and gas out of these fracking wells that they thought they were. They had to revise downward the estimated harvest in California by 96%, and nationwide it's already down 1/3. So we're getting all the downside of this fracking technology, and we're not getting the upside return that everybody says justifies it all. So thanks an awful lot, Jeff. We're going to let you go here. We're getting close to the end of the show. Now, getting on back to this pharmaceutical stuff here, and it gets worse and worse and worse in terms of what we're being sold. Now, you've probably heard about Vioxx. This was Merck Pharmaceuticals' so-called super aspirin. And about 10 years ago, it was pulled off the market because it was proven to double the risk of heart attacks and strokes. And they had a big ad campaign with celebrities like Dorothy Hamill and Bruce Jenner, and was used by 20 million patients. And estimates of the number of heart attacks caused by Vioxx range up to 140,000. And the Vioxx scandal made Merck the poster child for deceptive marketing because the cardiovascular risk was known but withheld from the FDA. And then in 2010, Merck had to compensate 20,000 heart attack and 12,000 stroke plaintiffs out of a $4.85 billion settlement fund. But that was just small change compared to how many billions they made selling this stuff. Now apparently Merck is being hauled back into court because apparently Vioxx also interferes with the healing of bone injuries, including during spinal surgery, according to a new report, and apparently Merck knew about that problem and also withheld that information. Whatever happened to, first of all, do no harm? And I know that Hippocrates himself didn't say that in the Hippocratic Oath, but it's always been a founding principle of medical care. First of all, do no harm. Down in Western Australia, there's been a major lawsuit regarding Fluvax. And apparently there was this young girl, Saba Button, was 11 months old when she received the Fluvax shot. She suffered hypoxic brain damage, kidney, liver, and bone marrow failure. She can't walk, and now she needs permanent round-the-clock care. And the parents sued, and they got a settlement to take care of their little girl again. And there are two issues here. One is the recklessness with which these products are rushed to market. And this business model that says we're going to make $1 trillion selling this, and then out of that we'll pay a few billion for the people who got hurt. And it's a very, very callous attitude. And the other one, and this especially gets into the area of the prescription psychiatric medication, the idea that a one-size-fits-all approach is going to work. And it doesn't. All of our chemistries are just slightly different, genetically, environmentally, based on our diet. Our chemistries in our bodies and in our brains are just slightly different from one to the other. We know that some people will take SSRIs and not suffer any harm, not go postal. But enough of them do where it's an issue. Apparently, even an anti-vaxxer got onto the Daily Show, Jon Stewart's Daily Show. And the show sort of was spinning that there, people who are concerned about vaccines are being silly, but at least it's getting network coverage here. Now, I know a lot of people are concerned about losing weight. I'm still trying to lose a little more weight here. And people like to use these artificial sweeteners, which are chemicals that fool your body into thinking that it's something sweet, but it's something completely different. Apparently, Truvia, and this is according to an article coming out of Natural News, somebody did a study where they fed Truvia to fruit flies, and the fruit flies died in less than a week. Now, the actual artificial sweetener in Truvia, erythritol, is derived from GMO technology. And apparently it's absolutely lethal to the fruit flies. And I know we don't want fruit flies around our kitchen eating stuff, but at the same time they're saying, sure, go on. Eat this GMO corn. It's designed to explode the stomach of insects who are eating it, but it's going to be okay for you. Another article about from RIF.com where they're talking about Monsanto, Syngenta, Pioneer are using political co-option and corruption to basically force GMO into Europe. Now, a lot of these European countries don't allow GMO, or they require GMO labeling. Hungary banned GMO, burned the fields down to get rid of that pollen. But Monsanto's attitude is, we don't care if you, the customers, want this or not. By golly, we're going to make sure that you will buy it and you won't have any other alternative choices. And it's just openly, the governments are openly for sale, especially here in the United States since that Supreme Court decision that says there's no limits to how much corporations can spend to buy the politicians. The no bidding ceiling, that's the highest bidder gets everything. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. This is a very bizarre story, came out of Cheese Underground, and it sort of caught my attention because I like cheeses, well-made cheeses, not the. In fact, I was noticing on that Fox News thing where they were talking about Taco Bell's new burritos. They actually had to say, this burrito is held together with a cheese-flavored product. They couldn't even say that was real cheese. But for those who like really well-made natural cheeses, what are called artisan cheeses, the FDA has just come out and said that cheeses may no longer be aged on wooden boards, which, by the way, is pretty much how cheeses have been aged as long as cheesemaking has been in existence. But the FDA has decided, no, this is not clean and hygienic. You won't use wooden boards anymore. You will buy these sterilized steel shelves from our friends who are great political contributors here. And we live in an age right now where government employees and agencies understand that the more ways they find to annoy the American people, the longer they'll keep their jobs, the more bonuses and raises they'll get. They're not thinking what's good for the population. They're thinking of coming up with something that justifies their continued employment in these harsh economic times. And some of it gets to be pretty darn silly. We have bigger problems in this country that need to be dealt with than what kind of shelf an aged cheese is put on, especially when you consider these aged cheeses are wrapped in these wax and cloth bundles. So it doesn't matter really what they're sitting on. Apparently, there's been a release. This was reported in The Guardian. The investigation into the Gulf oil disaster in 2010 found failures, poor testing, and ongoing risks, which are continuing today to the present. They haven't learned a lesson from what happened. Remember, at the time of the Deepwater Horizon disaster, the manual blowout preventer on that rig was 4 years overdue for its required maintenance, And the Minerals Management Service, the U.S. government agency that's supposed to keep an eye on that sort of thing, was just looking the other way. They were all buddy-buddy, acting like they're there to support the industry rather than to make sure the industry doesn't cause harm. And we see that with so many agencies that we're told are here to protect the American people, and we find out they're there protecting corporate profitability. That is fascism. We got to take a break for a commercial. Back with our last segment of the show after these few words. America, welcome back to the show. And apparently, NATO's Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen has declared that NATO does not recognize the South Ossetia election results. Apparently, yesterday they had an election for their parliament. And Rasmussen and NATO saying, absolutely not here. Now, Abkhazia and South Ossetia broke away from Georgia as independent states. Moscow officially recognizes their independence as of August 2008, following Georgia's military aggression against Saakashvili. And apparently, because they're voting their own parliament, NATO says, absolutely no, you will belong to Georgia. We're going to weld you back on there. And we're seeing this very alarming pattern coming out from the European, NATO, American leadership, where elections that give them what they want are legitimate and democracy, and elections that go against what they want are declared absolutely invalid and obviously fraudulent, and nobody should pay any attention to them. Like the recent European Union Parliament elections, which were a hammer blow against the globalists, and showed that Euroscepticism is very much on the rise in Europe. Well, no, you can't vote yourself out of the European Union. We worked too hard to enslave you to that. You know, and El-Sisi's election in Egypt, which had very low turnout, and he outlawed his opposition. That's democracy in action. Syria's Assad won re-election with overwhelming turnout, people just waiting in line for hours to vote him back into power. Oh, no, that's a farce. That's illegitimate here. Kiev's elections, absolute outright fraud on display for everybody to see. And I have to wonder, do these people who are out there making these declarations that this election that we like is legit and this other election that we don't like is not legit, do they not realize how obvious they are with these declarations? And to be very honest, what business is it of NATO? What's going on in Ossetia in terms of the election? Ossetia isn't a member of NATO. Ukraine isn't a member of NATO. They're rushing to try and get the paperwork caught up, but NATO does not have any business being in Ukraine. Certainly not to snarl and sneer at Russia. They're not even playing by their own rules anymore. It's just, we've got to grab this and we've got to grab that and we've got to re-enslave these people and we've got to bring the eastern Ukraine back in to pay their debts to the European Central Bank. There's almost a hysterical, frenetic frenzy about current events. It's almost like I'm reminded of that scene from the James Bond film Dr. No at the very end, where Dr. No is slowly sinking into the nuclear reactor, and because of his metal hands, he can't grab, and you just see him clawing at the metal as he goes on down. And it looks to me that's a perfect visual metaphor for the private central bankers, the U.S. government, NATO, the European Union. They feel themselves sinking, and they're just grabbing and grasping, trying to keep from going and sinking any further, and it's not going to reverse the trend. All righty, let's see. Apparently there's been a big volcano up in Alaska that has erupted. This is apparently it's a stratovolcano, very steep cone. It's out there in the Aleutian Islands. It's right on the edge of the ocean. If it were to lose a significant chunk of its mass into the ocean, the way Mount St. Helens blew part of itself off, we'd probably get some tsunamis. We're getting a continuation of a lot of small quakes down on the Big Island, and they're reaching out further and further from the area normally associated with seismic activity down there by Kilauea Crater. Now, just when you thought corporate media could not go any deeper into the cesspool of really bad reality show ideas, Apparently, and this is being reported by the Daily Mail in Great Britain, there's a new U.S. reality show that films women giving birth in the wild with no help from doctors. I don't think so. I mean, the possibility that the women and the babies could suffer harm from this. And I understand the attraction of the reality shows. They're very inexpensive to produce. And for some reason, they do have a following. I don't understand it. There's all these Real Housewives of whatever about these pampered, privileged women, moaning and complaining about, oh, the hairstyle didn't come out the way I wanted it. Lifestyles of the rich and vapid. But it is rather, I think it's a reflection of the deterioration of our society that this is what we're putting on TV right now. It really, really is. Alrighty, apparently Barack Obama has decided to continue the cap on student loan repayment, limiting it to 10% of the student's income, which is a partial step and a stopgap, except, of course, they're still accruing interest on the unpaid balance, which means in the long run they're going to wind up paying even more to the bankers. But I think somebody needs to ask, first of all, why college costs grew completely out of proportion with the rate of inflation to the point where everybody going to college had to go into debt. Was it another one of these mechanisms that they come up with to find new borrowers to keep that Ponzi scheme central bank going? It certainly looks like it. Looking at that thing with the taxi cab, and again, back during the oil crisis in 1970s, 1980s, carpooling was encouraged, diamond lanes, all of that stuff. And now today, no, you don't carpool. You're depriving a taxi corporation of money. There's an almost desperate quality to everything that's coming out of the government right now. They're just trying to find another penny somewhere. And the reality is, out here in the heartland of America, we're out of pennies. We're tapped out. You guys got it all. And this whole Federal Reserve system was set up to get all the money in circulation and put it in the pockets of the bankers, and nobody took a moment to plan what they were going to do when they succeeded, when there was no more money out there in circulation, when retail outlets were shutting down, workers are being let go, everything's in complete free fall. Well, they've got all the money. Why isn't it working? Because for an economy to function, currency has to flow at all levels freely and into all necessary sectors of investment. And when you pile it all up in one big pile over Wall Street in Washington, D.C., that's not an economy. That's money junkie greed on display. It's not a system any longer. It's just simply a horde. All right, more fighting in eastern Ukraine. They're calling it a war zone now. Heavy artillery being used on these civilians. And it's just going to take one hothead or one false flag going in the wrong direction, and we're going to be in a full-on war with Russia and China, which right now I think the U.S. government wants. A Cold War isn't going to serve their purpose. Europe isn't going along with any more Russian sanctions. More and more countries are dropping the dollar and going with the ruble and the renminbi and the yuan because the U.S. dollar has destroyed itself. Or more accurately, the money junkies destroyed the dollar with this license to counterfeit over there at the Federal Reserve. This is going to wind up in a real, honest-to-goodness, major, major war, and the wrong people are going to die in it. Unless we all agree to stand up and stop it. And how we do that is really very simple. When you're out in public, at the supermarket, at the library, at the sporting events, you just talk to people. And you just say, wow, is it amazing how bad things have gotten? This isn't the United States anymore. They've taken away our First Amendment rights. They're trying to take away our Second Amendment rights. We have the president saying that he has the legal authority to kill Americans without trial anywhere in the world or throw us in prison without trial, indefinite. The police are brutalizing the American people. There's no money for food for the American people. There's no money to build up our manufacturing, but tons and tons of money going to the war effort. We're in a world war. They don't want to admit it, but we're there. And this country is going to lose this one. And you know something? The bankers who are behind it, they don't care. They don't care which side wins or loses as long as both sides go into debt to those bankers to fight the war and rebuild from the war. That's the scam. All right, there's the music. Time to get out of here. I'm obviously on my way to Office Depot to buy a new uninterruptible power supply. We will be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. We may be a little delayed getting our podcasts up because of the power outage earlier today. So until we come back, again, get out there, talk to everybody you know about what you know. When you have the courage to speak out, you will give others the courage to speak out. Head on over to the Republic Broadcasting website, hit that donate button. As we demonstrated today, our equipment is wearing out and it must be replaced. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.